important is it for kids to be able to take risks, even if it means they might end up getting hurt? This is not a conversation parents had to have 30 years ago. Risky play was just called play. So what's changed? Call 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Joining us now in our Regina studio is Whitney Blaisdell. She's founder and executive director of Project Play, YQR. She also teaches education with SunTep, a program in partnership with University of Regina. Whitney, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you've seen this report. What kinds of things are we talking about when we talk about risky play?
There's lots of different types of risky play. So it's often that you're talking about play at height, play at high speeds, play around dangerous elements like water or fire for children, play with dangerous tools. There's a lot of different ways that people can play where you can get lost is a fun one, and play where you can just get hurt, where there's a risk of injury of some type.
There was one that stood out to me because I see my son doing this all the time. He loves wrestling, rough and tumble play, crashing into things. That's part of it too, right?
Yeah, and you got it. And people often just call that rough and tumble play.
Yeah. And then vicarious play was another one that stood out to me, that younger kids can just watch older kids do risky things, and that has benefits too.
Yeah, and that's interesting you bring that up. That's something that there were these sort of classic different components of risky play that people started talking about. I think it was Ellen Sandsetter who worked with children, and together they categorized these different types of risky play. And then what you're talking about, vicarious risky play, is sort of a new one that I'm kind of unsure about. But it's interesting that they're saying that children feel, like what you're looking for is this sense of thrill, and that they feel it when they're just even watching other people take risks. So it's certainly fascinating.
Any reason, though, why you would be unsure about it, or?
I am wary that of these sort of shifts in how we talk about play, how we advocate for play, how play is narrated, and changes in childhood and things. And I'm unconvinced that saying that children watching other people take risks is kind of enough, and it doesn't sound as fun to me, and so I just don't know how exactly that's going to be sort of adopted into the conversation, and so I'm a little bit on the fence with that one. But it is fun. I mean, I really like watching my kids take risks, and it is fun to watch a movie. I think that's kind of the thrill of even like a thriller movie. So I get it, but yeah, I just have some trepidations with it.
Yeah, and I can understand that. I guess I was thinking of heading out to Optimist Hill here in Saskatoon, where the older kids might be snowboarding and flying off ramps and that sort of thing. And I mean, maybe my 4-year-old could be doing that, but also he just gets to see that one day maybe he can too, and it might be something he wants to try.
Yeah,
eventually.
Absolutely. And you do learn too. You learn a lot from just watching someone else navigate that terrain and navigate that risk. So there's certainly like the developmental benefits, I guess, but. Yeah, it is a fascinating one. It's interesting.
So the examples that you gave, and I think what stands out most, maybe to me and maybe to some other parents listening, is that there is that risk of physical injury, even like the risk of getting lost. I think we kind of all, I have a tendency to want to hold my breath. I don't want my kids to get hurt. And so we're going to hear in a second from an emergency physician and medical co-director of trauma, and who was part of the study from the Canadian Pediatric Society. But just, I want to give you a chance to talk about that side of it and that initial reaction that many people have to go, oh my God, I just want to keep my kids safe.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most caring, loving thing that we can do is just want to keep our kids safe. And I think part of an important part of the conversation is looking at what is sort of a minor risk and what could cause a minor injury versus something that's more major and really scary. So even when you're looking at risk, looking at the difference between, for example, a scrape or a bruise compared to a spinal injury or a head trauma. There's a huge spectrum to what our threshold is towards risk. And I think a large important part of this conversation too is also like, you're not a bad parent if you get uncomfortable with risk. That's the point of it. And it's tough too, I think, for adults, the things that when you watch someone do something, especially when it's a child that you care about and love, our bodies aren't as resilient to risk as children's bodies are, and so it looks and feels more dangerous than it often is. So it's a really tough thing to navigate as parents, and I totally appreciate that. And as a parent myself, I live that. So.
I feel it so deeply. I have so much to talk to you about, Whitney. We'll get to more of this in a moment, but let's first listen to Dr. Suzanne Benno. So she is an emergency room physician, medical co-director of trauma at the Hospital for Sick Children. Dr. Benno, also chair of the Injury Prevention Committee for the Canadian Pediatric Society. Here is part of her conversation with the CBC's Adam Hunter.
Risky play is not ignoring evidence-based and mandated safety measures. So we advocate still for the use of helmets, car seats, life jackets, etc. It's not about leaving children unsupervised in potentially hazardous situations. So we're not, encouraging kids to go play in street traffic or in, very rough water without supervision. And it's not pushing children to take risks beyond their own comfort level. And so when the conversation starts, focusing on injury prevention, we have to really differentiate between risks and hazards. So a risk is a situation where a child can recognize and evaluate the challenge and decide what they're going to do based on personal preference and self-perceived skills. So how high are they going to climb that tree? Whereas a hazard is a situation where the potential for injury is beyond their capacity to recognize it or manage it. So if there's a rotten tree limb, they may not recognize that as a hazard. So as adults, and caregivers, we actually step in to eliminate or mitigate hazards while we facilitate opportunities for children to engage in risky play. And the injury rates, they support increasing risky play. So most of the injuries described with this are minor injuries, cuts, bruises, scrapes, these sorts of things. We definitely want to avoid serious injury and harm in children, and by properly navigating risks and hazards, the evidence shows us that we're absolutely fine, and the risks or the benefits, significantly outweigh the small risk of injury with this type of play.
Doctor, what's the line between being a helicopter parent and encouraging and also teaching about risky play?
Yeah, I think that's really difficult, and I think that there are different ways that we can help sort of move away from that helicoptering. So even ways that we communicate with our kids. So instead of kind of inciting fear, I guess, in them a little bit. So for example, we'll often say, "Stop, too fast, be careful," what have you. As an adult or a parent, you're saying, "I love you, I care about you, I don't want you to get hurt." But over time, when kids are hearing this over and over, they're internalizing, "You don't trust me, you don't think I can do it, I need an adult's presence in order to be here." And they're innocuous phrases, but they can convey fear even when there's little or no danger. So there's different tips that parents can do. Some experts suggest practicing a 15 to 30-second pause when they're observing and observe their child's state of play, and get a sense of any amount of distress. If there's distress, then they can intervene. But when they intervene, the focus would be really on raising that child's awareness of the situation and then helping them manage it through problem solving. So instead of "You're too high, get down," "You're really high up in that tree. How are you going to get down? What are you going to do? Do you see the branches there?" These sorts of things where you can actually use them as a teaching moment to kind of facilitate how to problem solve.
That is Dr. Suzanne Benno. One of our guests today is Whitney Blaisdell, who is Executive Director of Project Play YQR. Whitney, what stood out to you from that? Like thinking about the importance of how we talk to kids about their risky activities.
Yeah, a lot. I like the more sort of empowering language. I see a lot of sort of child-led practices of looking at, you're not trying to push a child to take a risk that they don't want. That's not what we're trying to do when people are advocating for risky play. It's about allowing them to take the risks that they crave and desire and feel comfortable and thrilled and happy by. And then just as a parent, I guess, watching and making sure, or a teacher or whatever role you're in when you're caring for children, is looking at how you can help them take those risks in a way that isn't going to cause a major injury. And I think, too, a lot of it, and a lot of what I see and I'm excited about sort of a push for, is pushing language around, just the importance of this in general, and that injury is not an exceptional part of childhood. It's a very normal thing to get a little bit hurt every once in a while, and it doesn't mean that a kid is a bad kid or that they failed, and neither does it mean that a teacher or a child good, educator or a parent is bad at what they're doing either. This is very normal.
Normal to, for example, fall off a bike. But then, I work in the news. I'm exposed to what can happen if we don't take steps to avoid danger. And so just I'm wondering how to balance that. How do you help your kids avoid dangerous situations?
Yeah, so then that's a good example of a risk versus a hazard. So, the risk is when you're on a bicycle, there's a risk that you fall. The hazard is the vehicles. And so I think where I really want this conversation to go, and you're good because you're in the media, is looking at, let's talk about community accountability for children, and how do we create a community that supports children being able to be children and to take risks. And so are there traffic calming measures? Are there pedestrianized areas that children can ride bicycles? Are there bike paths that are available to all children in all neighborhoods in the city? Are there safe places for children to test risk and test their skills and have fun in the community without these hazards being present all the time? And is that accessible?
That gives me goosebumps, Whitney, because as a parent, I can only do so much. And and you're right. They live in a community, and what are we doing as a community? I just think of how are my kids going to get to the park on their own? And I don't know yet. I don't know how we're going to cross that street.
Yeah,
that takes us to the park. We'll get there, but it's not just a me thing. It's who's texting as they approach that park. That's what scares me.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's so interconnected. I mean, it's driver education, it's urban planning, it's do we have a healthcare system that has the capacity to support this? People will talk about, I would love to take my kid for a bike ride, but I don't have the time to spend 13 hours in the emergency room. I mean, it all matters. It all comes to the table here, and that's where I really hope that this will go.
Yeah. I'm speaking today with Whitney Blaisdell, founder and executive director of Project Play YQR. We're hoping you'll call us and email us to 1-800-716-2221, bluesky@cbc.ca. A couple of emails have just come in, but I want to bring someone else into the conversation first. Next to me is Melody Lesativo, the owner of Love Zone Early Learning Center in Saskatoon. So Melody, you work with smaller kids, right? Under 6 is who you've got with you. So you've been listening to this conversation. I'm wondering what stands out to you as someone who's an early childhood educator.
Well, while I'm listening to the conversation over time, I step back and realize what is risky play really, and in a deeply meaning for the children. In our program, we practice the safe, nurturing, fun, and excellent learning environment. And for us to provide that philosophy, we as the educator, we make some assessment. We call it in our program risk assessment. So we do as an educator to investigate the play area where the children will be exposed. And after that, what we're going to do is we will collaborate. We do the planning with the children to get their interest, and then we step back as an educator and we do collaborate, and then we have conversation with the children.
So maybe as an example, you have a tree in your backyard.
Yes.
And the kids can climb it.
They can. And in the summer, that tree is very, very busy. But one thing I overheard is that child who come up on the tree, they started like they have the fear.
Yeah.
And you can tell. And we will kind of have that conversation before we expose her or him to the tree and say, it's okay, you are going to slip, but it's okay, I'll be here. And I'm going to help you and support you to go up and try it. And then it's give a real sense of confidence to the child that my auntie, they call us auntie in the center, is here. If I fell or even if I fall, she will help me get back. And that helped a lot for that little child to develop that confidence that, I will not do it at first, but I'm going to keep trying and try till I master the skills.
And this became a passion of yours. You were telling me how you came from the Philippines about 17, 18 years ago.
Yes.
And you were noticing things here in Saskatoon. What stood out to you about how we play versus how you played at home?
Yeah. So one thing that I stood, because I started opening a day home in my own home, is that these children are they have that interest to explore, but they are not provided that, now they call it risky play. Back in the days, I call it adventure. Right. That's what I call it.
Yeah.
And let's go. Let's do adventure. And they start like asking, why? Because this is unfamiliar for them. And so I kind of introduce to them before we go on hand of what we're doing. And then we do a lot of planning. It's not planning to make them safe, but for the children to understand if something happened, what are we going to do? And what I learned on that process is that when you give or empower the children to be in the position that they can decide for themselves, even on their little size, I call them little size, they can able to navigate the solution on that certain time. And they will going to tell you, Auntie, I did it. And then you push them, like praise them and say, oh yeah, you did it. And then we just keep going, practicing all of that.
Does it make you think of your own childhood and what you did for play?
Oh, yeah. Back in the Philippines, we play from the morning till the evening outdoor. We are just like monkey hanging in the tree. We just grab some fruits along the way when we're playing. We're just playing with the cows and everything. And that's make me really, really have the confidence to integrate our program in this kind of risky play, that I can see that children can learn more in terms of competence and confidence that really important for them growing as a little guy or a little girl. And when they have that instilled with them, they're going to go through some ups and downs, but still they know to step back and just kind of breathe.
How do you deal with the parents? Are parents trepidatious when you are encouraging kids to do risky things?
I love when I have that conversation with parents. You will see the facial reaction and say, Mommy, they are okay. And you know what? We encourage them, and we always tell them that we trust them big time. And they will just it's hard for parents to let go. And I really understand. But then what I do is I document. And then I send it to them. And there are things that are unfamiliar with the parents. And I will, when they come back for pickup, we will just kind of say, Mom, Dad, it happened. But you know what your child did? He said, Auntie, it's okay. And then they brush it up. They were going to show me they brush it off, and then they're fine.
Because all parents come from they have their own experiences, their own background. I mean, there's parents of different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so do you see a difference of how you might have to negotiate with parents depending on what their own upbringing or their own culture, their own class? I mean, there's so many things at play, right?
I agree, Alicia. And that when I started incorporating risky play in our program, it's a really big challenge on me because especially me as an immigrant in Canada, I have to learn this very, very deep. How can I connect with the parents and understand their, number one, socioeconomic, number two is their family background, what are their beliefs as a family? And so I come up that every family or mom and dad, they want similar things in these little people. And what I personally derive as me as the educator is just to put my feet on their shoes as a parent in Canada setting. And so I dig deeper on that scenario, and then I come to them, what's your expectation and how can I meet your expectation in terms of risky play? Because me as an educator who is with your child from 7:30 to 5:30, I want them to grow and be confident and competent. And then the collaboration come in, and that's the beautiful thing. They will see, at the end of the day, they will see scrape on their knee. They're going to see scrape on their elbow, but they will tell me, Auntie Melody, it's fine. I know they have fun and they learn. And that's the beautiful thing.
Well, Melody, I appreciate you sharing a bit of what you're doing at your center with us. I know you have to get back because there's kids who are waiting for their auntie. So, Melody, thanks so much for being part of this today.
Thank you for having me.
We have a couple of parents and educators standing by to share their perspectives on this, but I want to read a couple of emails for you. So Donna writes, children need creative play. When I was a child, like many children, the time to come home was when the streetlights came on. Psychologists invented the concept of helicopter parents. A child must be scheduled and taught about stranger danger. Unfortunately, parents weren't taught that most of the danger was close to home. As long as children do no harm, let them live in their vivid imaginations. Children wear bumps and bruises from play as a badge of honor. Children, it's just a short period of time. That comes to us from Donna. One of our guests today is Whitney Blaisdell, founder and executive director of Project Play YQR. Whitney, before we bring a couple of other people into the conversation, I just want to ask you about how to incorporate this. Like, people are so busy, a lot of scheduled activities. Should parents be building in free time outside for this kind of unscheduled play? What are your thoughts on that?
Good question. Yeah, I think it's great, and I think it depends on what the child, what children want. And I loved playing outside as a child so much, and when I've been doing some of my research, that just comes up so much, where people really love spending time outside. I noticed with your previous guest that was on. And that was sort of something that kept coming up when I was working with parents and caregivers, was they'll talk about their own experiences being outside, what their own childhood was like, some of their favorite memories. And they're often outside doing some sort of risky play, and they're often alone. They're unsupervised. And they build a lot of confidence from that. And a lot of people that I was working with were saying their favorite qualities of who they are now often come from those experiences and those memories. So I'm a big advocate for taking kids outside and having unstructured time or child-led time. There's lots of ways we talk about that. But just being a kid, and even adults just being kids, and just not having an agenda, not having an outcome to what you're doing with the same way that we do with sort of structured activities. Those are awesome too. But just taking time to just spend time outside and do what you want. And if it involves risk and thrill, then great. And if not, then that's great too. I love that kind of stuff.
Well, let's bring a couple more people into the conversation. So we've got Landon Shira, a father of two, also taking his Bachelor of Education program through SunTep. He's in our Regina studio and has been listening along. Hi, Landon.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I also want to say hello to Chris Scribe, who's a father of four. He's got a doctorate in education, is the executive director of Walks First Educational Consulting. So he provides Indigenous and cultural services locally, nationally, and internationally. Chris, hello.
Hello. Good
Hey.
day. Good day.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. So you're busy. You're busy parents. We all are. Chris, I want to start with you. What is your take on risky play?
Yeah, like many parents listening, and I think it's a wonderful topic to discuss. But like many parents listening, we're thinking back to our own play as young people, and it was kind of like you get home from school and you're just gone and you're out and you're playing. And now that just seems like, unbelievable that we would allow that type of play to happen. Yet that type of play, as research has found, is so amazing and so beneficial to our children. Like we are taking that away from them. And I just think that the more we get, while my kids are yelling and playing around in the house right now. So, yeah. So I'm actually a parent. So it's not. So we're missing, I think, a huge opportunity for our children to develop in so many amazing ways when we take that unstructured play away from them.
But how are you doing it, Chris? And I'll put the same question to Landon. I know my experience. I've got two kids. There's free time, but there's also activities, and I work full time. And there is a part of me that's always wondering, how can I really do all of this? How can I read to them and just fit everything in? So how do you do it with as a father of four? How do you incorporate this?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that there's so much expectation on being a good parent, and there's so many people telling you how to be a good parent or how to be a good educator and the stuff that we have. It just piled upon piles upon piles of different stuff that we have to do, when ultimately our children already know what to do. So how are we doing it? We just have to take a step back and allow our children to play at their genius level thinking of play. I heard a really cool research that happened in regards to, they call it paperclip research, where they give an adult a paperclip and say, how many ways can you use this paperclip? They'll come up with 10. You give it to a child and they'll come up with hundreds at a genius level understanding of imagination. So our children are already at this beautiful, amazing, genius level, PhD level play. We just have to allow them to do that. And just take space. So they want to go play outside. Take the time to allow them to do that, and don't structure it. Don't have to say you play 5 minutes on this, 10 minutes on this, and watching them like a hawk. It doesn't help them. Allow them to experience that. It's just the backyard,
Yeah.
It's just allowing them to go out there.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you a glimpse into our house just a little bit. So my son is 4.5, and before bedtime, all he wants to do is wrestle my spouse. Like they're just, there's like roughhousing, and I'm like, get to bed, and like let's read stories. And I always want to put a stop to it because I'm trying to calm things down. And then when I looked closer at this study and the importance of rough and tumble play, I'm like, maybe I should allow that for 10, 15 minutes. It's probably beneficial for everybody. He's letting off some steam before he winds down. So that's happening at our house. Landon, I want to know what's happening with your family. How are you building risky play into the lives of your own kids?
In a very similar way to what was just mentioned, I'm finding that, that's totally the case where, I'm a father of two young girls, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. And my one daughter in particular, she's 5 and she's climbing constantly. So we were finding that she was climbing everything in the house, certain things that we would rather not have her climb. So what I incorporated was I this past summer built a ninja slackline course just in our backyard.
Yeah.
And she's on it all the time. And it's a great way for her to be given that freedom of creating new experiences all on her own. And like what was just mentioned, I don't have to do anything other than, like supervise the odd time, come and peek in. And if I notice she's having trouble with something, just talk about, how's you're trying to hang by your feet. How might you hook your feet better to avoid falling this next time? Just kind of giving those little tips. But other than that, she creates the experiences all on her own, and she does a far better job than I would. Adults tend to have that sort of rigid mindset.
Yeah.
So.
Even just heading out and tobogganing, right? That's risky play. Tobogganing is thrilling. Whitney, as you listen to all three of us talk here, I am wondering what you're thinking about, because there are so many programs now that cater to risky play. And everything from parkour classes for kids, outdoor clubs, scouts. Often it's scheduled, costs money. Has risky play become something, perhaps, that you have to be somewhat privileged to do?
I love this question. I feel like every once in a while you'll see things on Twitter that ask questions like, what's classy if you're rich and trashy if you're poor? And then people will say things like having the number of a lawyer in your wallet, speaking another language, evading taxes. And I feel like, to add to that list, 100% I would say risky play. People pay, an arm and a leg to put their kids in structured activities that they're playing and they're taking risk. And even when you see people out and children out in public taking risks, there's a whole different perception of how we perceive that, depending on a lot of things like socioeconomic status, how long someone has lived in Canada, race. So there's so much privilege built into risk and how parents are perceived. There's so much that we're internalizing. There's so much that children are internalizing. And so it's strange. But risky play is really in itself kind of a privilege in a way. And there's so many programs too that are, it's important to remember that they may be really amazing programs, and they are. And I, as someone who's really privileged, I've had my kids in some really cool stuff that I love. Yeah. It still is often a business, right? And often how they market their work and what they do is by attaching a message around good parenting and a message around child development, and almost to say, your child will develop better by being in this program. And that is very powerful messaging. And in a way you can't really replace child-led, unstructured outdoor play. And it doesn't really cost much at all, besides, this kind of privilege that's built into how people perceive it that in itself is a really big risk. And when I talk about risk, I mean a big risk. I'm talking about parents who are telling stories about their children playing outside and people calling the police or calling social services. So I think that's also something that we really need to start combating and telling new stories, or actually kind of old stories about what good parenting looks like and what being a good community member looks like. All sorts of things. I love this conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, and I do, Chris, do you have thoughts about that in particular?
Yeah, I mean, as an Indigenous parent, I think that that hits home. I mean, we are perceived differently especially in this province, we're perceived differently in regards to how we raise our children. I mean, it's sad that we have to mention statistics. I always hate mentioning statistics, but we have the highest number of children in care, a very small population in this province, in this country. And we have so many kids that are in care, and that is a direct reflection, whether it's stated or not, on parents, so that's subconsciously in our minds when we're thinking of these things. Also, the fact that, poverty is a real issue. There's a lot of Indigenous mothers raising our children by themselves, and being able to have these programs accessible to them is almost near impossible. So does that make them a bad parent for saying, okay, I'm gonna allow you to go to the park by yourself? And like, these are real conversations and real thoughts from Indigenous parents. And God forbid that all of a sudden something happens to our kid where they get injured and maybe they break an arm, or something that happens. And then that also is a flag that gets put up for us. So risky play, also there is a lot of privilege that's attached to that, and it's something that we need to talk about and something that we need to address, because not everybody has the ability to put our kids in these programs where it's all structured of risky play. Sometimes we have to do, the way that we were taught growing up, is just to be able to be out there in our communities.
Yeah.
That comes also, to something else that I wanted to share, is that when a lot of, like, for me, for example, and my partner, we both came from living in our communities on our reserves, and then coming to the city, raising our kids in a city, completely different environment. And for us, there's so many unknown risks that are out there beyond of what we knew, even crossing streets, like all of that. Like, we didn't cross streets. I mean, there was barely a gravel road, on my reserve. So there's all these other things, other factors that are in there for stuff that we didn't know. And we're educated people. It's not like we don't know the world, we travel all over. So it's also about, your community that you're in. Are you familiar with that? Do you feel safe in that yourself? So those are other things that I'm thinking about as well.
Yeah. Landon, what would you like to add to the conversation on this?
Yeah, just going off of what Chris mentioned there. Like, I grew up on a farm just outside of the small town of Spiritwood. And so I do have to at least acknowledge that my experience as a child was, in regards to play, was slightly different than what my daughters are experiencing here in the city. It was nothing as I was growing up, for me to form all of my best memories just being out on my own or with friends and, jumping across round bales, just doing farm kid stuff. My parents instilled the awareness of certain things not to do, climbing on certain equipment, or don't hop in a grain hopper or anything like that, the obvious clear hazards.
Yeah.
But other than that, a lot of that was left up to us. However, with my daughters, I'm especially finding now with my 5-year-old, as she has just learned to ride her bike without training wheels, she's riding her bike, but I've also had to mention to her, okay, you're going past a driveway. Do you notice that car has its taillights on? What might that mean? Do you notice that there's exhaust coming from the vehicle? What might that look like in a few seconds? So those were things that I didn't necessarily have to factor in as a child, but yeah, it's nonetheless, it's there are still a lot of teachable moments with this type of play.
Whitney, how do you suggest we deal with some of those things? I know you talked earlier about looking at our communities as a whole. Are we asking for traffic calming measures? But until some of those things are in place, what advice do you have for families who are trying to be open to letting their kids be independent, to do this kind of stuff, but feel that concern about where we live, and can a child do some of this stuff safely?
Good question. I do try to push for, what's happening on a larger level, but individually there's a lot of things, and I think starting really small. So starting with what you're comfortable with. Your comfort does matter. Children are very smart, and they're going to pick up on if you're really afraid or unafraid. They they'll know that, and it'll affect their experience. And so doing something that you're both comfortable together, whether it's inside or outside. I really like outside, and it seems sometimes counterintuitive, but if you're going to start, navigating the terrain of risky play, outdoors is a really great place to start because there's more sort of structural integrity to the structures outside. So children are going to take risks. They love to take risks. Probably any parents or people that are around children are aware of this. But when they're inside something like climbing a bookshelf, yeah, right? So you already have that kind of visceral reaction to that. We know what's going to happen. That bookshelf is going to probably tumble down on them. A dresser, a couch, things like that can tip. Outdoors, the things that children are climbing are often trees. Big rocks are so fun. Big boulders are fun to climb. And they're going to hold their place, and they're going to really support children, usually, unless a tree is sort of rotten. And so even starting with a tree that you have a relationship with, starting small. But even when a tree is rotting, it gives clues about that, and you can intuit it. And children intuit these things extremely well. So even I don't think that playgrounds are even kind of the best place to start. I really like starting with actual natural structures that exist.
What happens when city workers end up having to cut down some branches, and so usually it is because of a rotting branch that could pose a hazard, but then people start to question, like, oh, we want our kids to be out playing, and then yet we take away these things. Or Toronto, there's an example there. I mean, they've banned tobagganing on a number of hills because of safety hazards, and of course people react to that. So on one hand, we have messaging about letting kids go, and then others that really remind us that we're very much in a bubble-wrapped society. I'm just wondering what you think about that, Whitney. And then I want to get to some callers.
Yeah. I know, it's such a fascinating conversation. I don't think that banning tobagganing on hills is a very responsible decision, personally. I think it goes against a lot of evidence. It kind of robs children and adults and people of kind of a good experience. And I think, so going back to what you can do on an individual level is really taking small steps and really educating your children as much as you can and giving them all the tools that you have about how to trust your own body, what it feels, the difference between thrill and fear, because fear is often trying to teach you a lesson that this is actually not safe. This doesn't feel good. Fear is not a good feeling. Thrill is. But we need thrill and fear. We need to learn those things through experience, like tobogganing. But, and things like, who can you approach? Who lives in the neighborhood that you can talk to? Trust. Who can you trust and who do you not trust? What is a hazard and what is a risk? All those things. So having conversations with your kids all the time. Yeah. Make eye contact with the driver. Assume that every single driver doesn't see you. They often don't. We know these things. So really trying to give your children the skills that makes you feel comfortable and them feel comfortable, and like you can trust each other and that you can trust them taking more risks and exploring a little bit more.
Thanks, Whitney. That's with Whitney Blaisdell, founder and executive director of Project Play, YQR. We're not done with her yet. We also have Landon Shira and Chris Scribe, both parents and educators too. But we've got some callers on the line. So Vivian in Saskatoon, we'll go to you next. Hi, Vivian.
Hello there, Lisa. I'm glad that you're having this as a local discussion. I went to a school, and I'll describe our playground. We had teeter-totters, we had jungle gyms, we had, swings, everything. And one thing called a maple, which wasn't a fancy walk around. It had these bars that you pick up and you run around the maple and swing your feet off the ground. Now I'll tell you what school that was. I went to school in Brantford, School for the Blind, and these were all kids. We just played outside, took chances. I'm sure some of the supervisors kind of watched for us, but I'm trying to tell people who have children here who are integrated in the school system, don't be a helicopter parent, because kids have to learn. Like all these other people are saying, you have to learn to be careful, but you also have to have fun. And we also had a nice hill that we had tobogganing. And then there were some kids who were brave enough to go down this steep hill on roller skates. Now imagine that when you can't see.
Because you are visually impaired, Vivian.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun. And one daredevil girl, she straddled the top of the swing. You can imagine where the swing goes. She straddled that. Well, we had a lot of fun, but we learned too. We had a few scrapes, that kind of thing. But we also had hockey teams and also broom ball for the girls. Lots of sports, but it was unsupervised in a sense because we were safe in the playground.
Well, Vivian, I thank you for calling. I mean, that's just a great story, and we've got a number of callers to get through. I'm so glad we got to hear from you.
Well, listen,
Thanks, Vivian.
I'm glad I let you know about that.
Take care. Let's go to Zoe, who joins us right now in Saskatoon. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Lisa.
What's on your mind?
I was listening with so much interest to this conversation. I'm really grateful for the points the callers have brought up. I run one of the structured programs of risky play and outdoor play. But what I had wanted to share was earlier when Whitney was talking about vicarious play, this has been something I've worked through in my practice, and I think that it is such a good opportunity for us to have those noticing moments with our younger children in sort of the same language that we've been sharing about, or that they've been sharing about climbing trees, like notice how those branches feel. Are they feeling strong? And we can make those observations for the younger children. And I've noticed that, if they've watched that play for a few weeks or a few times, sometimes with some of that coaching, they can then sort of start building some confidence to take that risk. So that was the thing that came up in my mind when I was listening in, and I really have appreciated the conversation.
Zoe, the other thing I want to ask you about, sometimes parents find it difficult to watch their kids do risky things. Is it sometimes helpful to send them off with someone else to try some of these things?
I am more than happy to watch your children do risky things. But yeah, I totally understand. I mean, I really heard what, I forget which caller was saying it, but, your feelings matter too. And so I usually try to talk to people about the interplay between the child and their experience and abilities, your own experience and abilities as a supervising adult, and then the environment. And I think that interplay is so important in this discussion that, if a child doesn't have experience climbing a tree, it might not be the right time for them to climb several branches off the ground. It might just be a few, or it might just be watching. And if you're not comfortable with that yourself, then that's not necessarily a good opportunity for a safe risk.
Well, Zoe, thanks for calling and joining the conversation. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa.
Happy playing. Let's go to Ted in Saskatoon. Hi, Ted.
Hi, Alicia. Thank you. It's apropos that this past Monday was International Bubble Wrap Day.
It was?
Yes, it was. That was a real thing. So I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, so certainly benign neglect was part of my upbringing. It's the old story about come back home when you're hungry after playing all day and get on a long hair. Now, that had its benefits, distractions. I think one of the big benefits was, and especially back then, because there were so many kids, I have no idea now how many young kids there are in terms of part of the population. But you'd be, as a young boy, you'd be hanging in groups of 6, 8, maybe even 10 kids. And there was a dynamic surrounding that. In terms of safety, you'd have one kid who would be reckless and willing to take risks, but you'd have a timid kid. You'd have kids in between. And you'd have a group dynamic where we'd only go so far. We'd hold back the risky kid, and the timid kid would kind of be brought up by everybody else. I think that had benefits. And it also taught us about social interaction, how to get along, compromise, not getting into stupid fights over something irrelevant or meaningless.
Yeah.
Kind of the same way sports teaches us. So I think those are all the lessons that I've learned. And I think it's kind of sad that we now have to call what I call play risky play. It's too bad it's had to be attached to a label, but I guess that's the march of time.
Yeah. Well, Ted, thanks for calling. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've had a wonderful conversation today, and honestly, I wish I had more time with each of you. Chris Scribe, you've been one of our guests today, father of 4, and you do a lot of consulting and focusing on Indigenous education and how to look at things through that Indigenous lens. Maybe I'll just give each of you like 15, 20 seconds to kind of end today, because I'm wondering what you've learned from the conversation. because I think there's been a lot of sharing and we all kind of approach things slightly differently. So Chris, maybe just take 10 seconds to tell me what you've learned from this.
Yeah, I just again reminded that, our children are at that genius level of play, and just to allow them to experience that, I think is important for us as parents. As hard as it is for us to just take a step back and just allow them to play, I think it's super important, especially now in the most connected age of this world. Like, just allow our children to play. I think that's the realization that I had, as much as we can.
Landon, what about you?
Yeah, one of the takeaways I've had is I love the term vicarious play. I'm still not sure where I sit on it, but I think there's maybe pros, maybe cons to it, because I see my 2-year-old trying things that my 5-year-old is trying, and she doesn't necessarily have the scaffolded knowledge that can build up to that stuff, but it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. And Whitney, what about you?
I've also been paying a lot of attention to what people are saying about vicarious play and trying to figure out where I fall in it. And I'm noticing a lot of people are using it as a bridge, sort of as a scaffold, like Landon just said, to their own risky play or their own child's risky play, and to watch first and then do. So I'm warming up to it. I really like learning from all the callers today.
Well, thanks so much for being with us, Whitney Blaisdell, Landon Shira, and Chris Scribe. I'm Leisha Gravinsky. You've been listening to Blue Sky.